Hi there, welcome to August's first Friday. My name's Tom. I'm joined in the studio today with Stuart. It's always nice to see you in the flesh. And today we're going to talk about an article that I saw online, and it might be a little bit late for you and me because these are 20. It's 20 reasons not to have kids, but it's not just 20 reasons; it's 20 good reasons. So yeah, let's see what they've got. So what we thought we'd do is we'll go through these 20 reasons. And then we might get a little bit more serious at the end. People might have worked out there was a big decision made in America not too long ago in terms of abortion. And so we thought it's difficult to start light-hearted, but actually it's interesting that these are reasons that people are genuinely putting across to not have kids. So let's go through them and we'll see if we've got any comments. So the first good reason to not have kids is that kids cost a lot of money. Raising kids isn't cheap, says the article, especially in our modern developed world. For many, the high price tag of having a baby is a major deterrent. And they state some figures from Market Watch. So what do you think of that? Kids cost a lot of money.
I think that's true. And I would speak on behalf of the both of us and say probably when you have daughters, they probably cost more than
controversial.
Boys do.
You might be right. Yeah. Absolutely true. I think you can't deny that more humans in their family costs more money. Whether that is a good reason not to have kids, I think we'll see. But I think I would not argue with that one at all. Number 2, kids will make you sleep deprived. Kids, especially newborns, can keep you up at night. But it's not just newborns. Older children get sick, have nightmares, need to go to the bathroom. Maths may be good. No wonder that, according to the researchers, The Guardian says new parents face up to 6 weeks of sleep deprivation. Is that a good reason not to have kids?
Well, you know what they always say, that when you have a baby, it's like heaven because there's no night there. But I remember when Helen was expecting our first daughter, Heather, and this couple in the church, and I really think I think they were genuinely trying to encourage, but it just terrified me. And they said we didn't get any sleep for the first 5 years, and they were being absolutely serious. And wow, I was devastated. This before anything happened, and you just hear all these horror stories, don't you? And I know with our second daughter, Leah, I had one particularly terrible night where it didn't matter what we did, we couldn't get her to sleep. She was 17. No, she wasn't. She was just a baby. But in all seriousness, I remember that night in particular. It's funny how things stand out, don't they? And but I do remember that night. Helen had fed Leah, and we changed her and all the rest of it, so everything was clean, and she wasn't unwell. She just would not settle. And after a while, Helen then handed Leah to me for me to take over. And I remember saying to Helen at that time, how do single parents cope? I really take my hat off to single parents who don't have a spouse to hand the baby over to when things, because when you are tired, particularly, Leah was our second, and Heather was only 2 years older than her, so Heather was just a toddler when Leah was born. And you're just so tired, and you're working through the day, and in all seriousness, sleep deprivation is a form of torture, isn't it? Really, and so I certainly can understand that.
Yeah, I've heard people say before that having kids is a young person's game, because I do think the older you get, the harder you find it. So a friend of mine, he's in his 40s, got a couple of young kids, and he really struggles with it more. I would say this is one of the reasons I'm such a big fan of breastfeeding, because in the night, it wasn't really mainly my responsibility. So just hand the baby, or the baby would be next to my wife, she'd just pick the baby up, put the baby on the breast, and be very happy. My main sleep deprivation came when they were being weaned.
Right,
and so that was my time to get up. And I think it's absolutely right. And it's hard when you're struggling with sleep. It's hard to feel good about life at times, when you're really sleep deprived. So I'm sure that's absolutely true. So that's 2 for 2 at the moment. I think we can, these are good reasons. Number 3, kids, I should have read these ahead, should I? Kids are bad for your sex life. It's well-known fact that sexual intimacy tends to decline after you have a baby.
What is that? Anyway, but well,
he's drinking tea, so you
have
know
got
it's serious.
Yes, yeah. I've got a similar list that puts it better. Kids are bad for your romantic relationship. And all I would say in regard to that is that romance doesn't always equal sex.
Good one. I do think, yes, I think that it's, again, a lot of these we see are just about, are quite selfish, aren't they? And so if we're about having the most sleep and the most time with your spouse, then maybe you're not meant to have kids. But actually, if that's all that life is about, and so there can be seasons of life where things become more front and center, but actually to have, like, to make and raise a child together, I think is one of the greatest privileges in the world. And so as great as sex is, that's actually, is that the most important thing in the world? And I think sometimes our society has put that, you know what I mean, as literally the most important thing that you'll do. So if people talk about, you know, you have these old films about, you know, the 40-year-old virgin. Can you believe that there'd be someone who makes it to 40 and, you know, hasn't had sex? And you think, well, Jesus Christ was a virgin. Yeah. And so it's not the center of life. Is it great to be part of a marriage? Obviously, we recognize the importance of that, but it's not the most important thing, I would say. And so, yeah, maybe disagreement on that. Next one, babies make a lot of trash. Obviously showing the American, we don't really call it trash. Babies make a lot of rubbish. Every year, babies in North America specifically are responsible for using 30 to 40 billion disposable diapers that end up in landfill. What do you think?
Well, excuse the pun, I just think that's garbage. Really, I don't think that is a tipping point in terms of the challenges to the environment, the mess that babies create. I think we've got a long way to go before we get to cleaning that one up, literally, in terms of the mess that we can make of the environment as adults.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, we were, I think it was our second child, we went for these reusable cloth nappies, and it becomes a whole thing. And so babies can make a lot of rubbish, I'm sure, but so can we as well. Yeah. And I don't think that would be a defining one for me. Definitely not. Kids can hurt your earning power. It's unfair, but it's true. Having kids can negatively affect parents, especially women's salaries. What do you think?
Well, yes, you know, but again, these are things that I think that when I have the privilege of being a pastor and taking a prospective married couple through premarital counselling, and I've mentioned my 10 questions that I always put before them, but you know, one of the questions is, you know, are they, number one, are they agreed, do they want to have children? Never mind, are they agreed how they're going to raise children? But also, are they agreed about financial matters? Amongst the top three of marriage breakers is financial pressure. And so it is going to hurt your earning power. You know, I was a pastor for 25 years. I'm saying that to say this, that during the girls' growing up years, that's what I was. And, you know, pastors, certainly outside of the established church, are not always, they're not going to be in great wage. So I wasn't in a great wage. But, and then Helen didn't work until I think Heather had started P1 or reception class, and she got a part-time job, and it is a sacrifice. And I do think that it is a sacrifice for the wife, for the mother in particular. But I do think all round it is better in the long run for in those formative years for the mother to be at home with the children. I think that is best for everyone.
I agree with that 100%. And in fact, I was quite encouraged by this one as a reason, and that this is still a thing, because you'd think in today's culture, with so often both husband and wife having to work, you would think that maybe there's little difference because actually babies have just been shipped off to childminders and all that kind of thing. And so I'm encouraged by this, and actually think it is one of the best gifts that parents can give, where the mum is able to stay at home and care for that child and raise them. And we know that it doesn't always work that way. I think in our country right now, we're in a very blessed position where my brother has just adopted a child, and he's been able to take 6 months paternity leave, full paid. And friends of ours are pregnant, and I think they're planning for the husband to stay at home. And so I think it's, husband and wife, mother or father, I think is great. I think historically it's been the woman, and I think ultimately mums are just so important to kids, and they are probably the best person, aren't they? Ultimately,
yes, and despite the financial sacrifice, and also, and I think one of the points gets onto this, it's also a social sacrifice for the mother, particularly if she stays at home. But what I would say here on this particular point is that certainly my Helen, looking back on those years where she stayed at home, she doesn't regret it. And we often say it'd be nice to go back to that when the children were at that age and we were able to do that. So I think that it is the right thing to do, the best thing to do.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned there about the social side, and that is the next good reason not to have children. Kids can cause you to lose friends due to lack of time, busy schedules, and changing priorities. Kids can have a negative impact on even your closest relationships.
I wouldn't say negative. I think a change, it's a consequence. It doesn't need to be a bad thing. It's just that, we talk about different seasons in life, don't we? And I'll throw this in just now. I hadn't written it down to say maybe later, but I will throw it in because I think it covers a lot of these. I say to prospective married couples, if you want to continue once you get married, living the life of a single person, don't get married. And I think you've made the point earlier on in this conversation. By the same token, if we're thinking about parenthood, and we don't want those kind of consequences to come, better not. And I think people would say, well, that if people don't want to choose not to have children because they don't want to be inconvenienced, that is selfish. I would say it's more responsible if you're not willing for the consequences and challenges and changes it's going to bring, don't have children. But that then gets us on to another issue of what is the percentage, and I don't know the answer to this, of parenthoods which are planned in that sense.
Yeah.
And so people don't necessarily have the opportunity where they sit down and they say, well, we're now going to try for children. It doesn't always happen, or maybe mostly happen, and so it's unplanned.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. I think relationships change over time, and if a friendship can't survive the introduction of a baby, then I'm not 100% sure how strong the relationship was originally. I guess maybe it's coming from the perspective of younger people, and so if you're the only one with a child and people are still going out and night clubbing, all those things, that would definitely be impacted. But I'd like to think that relationships can develop and grow, with children involved. Next one, kids are bad for your health. According to researchers from the University of Minnesota, mothers consume more calories and get less physical activity than women with no kids.
Well, I'm reluctant to comment because the example that's used is in regard to mothers, and I'm not a mother, but my instinct is to just retreat to a wonderful Greek word, baloney.
Yeah, I think that's I guess is the link with lack of sleep. I think if you don't get sleep, you know what I mean, you're far more likely to consume more calories. I guess with busy life, you're less likely to take the time to prepare healthier food, less time to get to the gym, I guess. But it comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? That it's a different stage of life, and you need to kind of acclimatize to that.
Well, at my Helen, we maybe should have had our wives on.
A little bit late for that now, but yeah.
But you know, in many ways, I think she would say that that was probably the time that she was the fittest, because we had a double buggy, and
they're not easy to push around.
To walk down into Sheffield city centre every single day, and walk back. And so, it's all about choices in that regard. It doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah. Here's a really interesting one. I don't know what number we're up to, maybe 11 or so. It says this: kids are bad for your mental health. According to several studies, parents are at risk of depression and they're less happy than their childless counterparts. Really interesting, that one. What do you think?
Well, I'm reluctant to comment because, like when we talk about marriage, singleness can be as viable for some people as marriage. And so I'm always careful when I talk about marriage to make that comment that singleness is not like second best. It doesn't need to be that way. By the same token, a person or a couple who do not have children for whatever reason do not necessarily need to be worse off. That all to say, I can only say from my own experience that by God's grace and goodness, my girls have been the best thing about me in the whole of my health, whether it be mental health, emotional health, spiritual health. They've made me strive to be a better person than I would have been without them. And so I really can't go along with that. But I do think that, particularly when the teenage years come, and maybe when the children are at an age where they make their own choices and they maybe didn't make the choices that you would want them to make or they've been brought up to make, I do think that it is a part and parcel that there will come times when your children will break your heart.
Yeah. I can think of a number of couples where the pregnancy was very difficult, and again, particularly for the mother, obviously, and then the actual labor for certain women has been really traumatic, and then you have kind of postpartum depression, and I think that is a genuine thing, and so I don't doubt there are seasons and times, again, maybe particularly when your children are younger, and then maybe when they are older, that they can just really grieve you. And I remember reading a book by Gary Thomas. It's called Sacred Marriage, and the tagline always stuck with me. And he said, "What if God designed marriage not to make you happy, but to make you holy?" And I think the same thing can apply. He also wrote a book, Sacred Parenting, and I think that's the idea that, again, as we've decided that sex is like the most important thing in the world, we've also decided that every one of us deserve to be happy all the time. And I don't see that as a promise in the Bible. I do recognize that we can have joy because of what God has done for us. But actually, you read some of the Psalms and people were King David was in despair at certain points, difficult times, hard times in life. But actually, what if God has designed these things? What if parenting, having kids, is part of that process to shape you and develop you to be more like Jesus? And that's what you kind of said, that actually your children have brought out the best in you, and you are still striving to be an example for them today. And so, although we don't want people to be depressed and those things, I would be the same as you. I think my family, my wife and my children have brought me the greatest joy in my life. But it doesn't always feel like that. There are plenty of mornings you wake up and you think, what am I doing? But I think God is working through those situations.
Just laughing because somebody, I think, said that's why, God doesn't have to go through all these things because he doesn't need personal development.
That's very true. Absolutely. God is as holy as it can be. So the next point is that kids can stress you out. But I feel like is that any different than the last one? So I think we can move through that one. Kids can damage your social life, which I'm pretty sure we've also covered as well. So they're starting to double up now. I'm not quite sure there's 20 good reasons. Where are we at? Kids can lead to divorce. Interesting. If it's true that your romantic relationship will suffer once you've had children, then it is left unchecked. This decline could eventually lead to divorce. Sorry, I don't think I read that very well, or whether it's been written very well. But can you see that? Do you think?
Yes, I do. Not personally, but how it's always amazed me when I hear of a couple divorcing, maybe after 25 years of marriage, and you think,
Where's that come from?
But what happens is that the children leave the nest, as it were, and it reveals what's left between this couple, and in these cases, obviously not a lot, but yeah, I know, and Helen and I, by God's grace, have been married 31 years. And I think you said a similar thing in other conversations that we've had. Maybe it wasn't you, so maybe I'm going to get you into trouble. But certainly for Helen and I, the toughest part of our marriage was the first 2 years.
Yeah, no, I've definitely said that. Yeah.
We don't know what's ahead of us, but I tell you, if we were going to divorce and split,
Would have been
Helen
then.
and I, yes. And so again, it's just about protecting and nurturing your marriage. It doesn't need to be that way. And so, but it does happen, and there's the examples. People would be married for 20 plus years and then they get divorced.
Interesting. I didn't read the whole point. It says this: the small upside, parents may be dissatisfied in their marriage, but ironically, the likelihood of them actually getting divorced declines. Perhaps because they feel they must stay together for the children despite being unhappy. So that seems to, the end part of that seems to have gone completely against the start of it. But I think that's probably right. Again, the similar point about if life is just about you being personally happy. Instead of that, I think when you get married, but particularly when you have kids, you recognize the responsibility you have, the responsibility to care for these children is a huge responsibility. And so I think mums and dads they should put everything within them to stay together. That is all the stats show, don't they? That the best, healthiest, happiest children come from a two-parent family where the kids have been loved and nurtured and disciplined. And so I think you need to do everything within your power to make sure kids get that. Think of the damage over the years. And I wonder if that's led to, again, I don't know the figures offhand, but it seems to me that less people are getting married. A lot of my non-Christian friends are in long-term relationships. Most of them have got kids, but they're not married. And I think there is something missing there in terms of that commitment to each other. Like, I'm not just going to bail on you. I'm not going to walk out on you. My wife says it's really interesting at work. A number of her friends at work have a couple of years older than her, some of these in their 50s, and they've recently kind of left their relationships. A few have got divorced, and they were kind of citing this YOLO phrase, which is a very youth and teen thing. YOLO. Have you heard of that before?
No.
YOLO stands for you only live once. And what they're saying to each other is, look, we only get one chance at this. So I'm not feeling particularly happy right now. So I might as well just ditch it in and go and find something else. But all the figures seem to show that people who get remarried, if you haven't dealt with the core issues, why is it going to be any different with this new person?
I heard recently a survey that the BBC reported on, saying that the average age in the United Kingdom for people getting married now is 33.
Interesting.
So
that's obviously gone up, hasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Next one. Kids contribute to climate change. I feel this is a little bit linked with they make more rubbish.
Yeah.
Do you have a Greek word for us for this one?
Just the same one.
Yeah. Don't need any more than that. What does it say? Although the recent school strikes for the climate have inspired millions around the world to get serious about taking action on climate change, it's no small irony At the same time, the number of kids being driven to school has spiked in recent decades, contributing to climate change. You don't have
We used to walk everywhere. I mean, we used to walk to school, but that is right. We do drive the children everywhere these days, don't we?
Yeah.
And I think also, but a part of that is my own experience as a parent, particularly where we lived in Sheffield. I wouldn't want my girls to be. Things are different now. I think things are more dangerous now than they were certainly in the late 60s and early 70s when I was, a child. We played out, and walked everywhere and all the rest of it. And it wasn't a problem. But maybe the days are just as dangerous. We knew that bad things happened back then, but maybe it's about perspective. When you become a parent, your perspective does change and you begin to be anxious and aware of things that you'd never thought about before. So
yeah, and I definitely lament that at points. It's not that our girls are on screens all the time, like sometimes is the perception, but they're definitely just not out on the streets. Like when I was a kid, when my brother was 13 and I was 10, we cycled from Hyde in Greater Manchester to Wellington in Shropshire, which is about a 70-mile journey on B roads on two bikes. I don't think we wore helmets, if I remember rightly. And just when I think now about my 15-year-old, my 13-year-old, my 8-year-old, particularly even my older two, would I send them off to cycle halfway across the country? It feels like a very different time. And that is a legendary story within our family because of it. And I sometimes think, man, what were my parents thinking? But I think it was a different time. Right, next one. Kids kill your me time. This is excellent. According to a study reported in the Daily Mail, the average mum has just 17 minutes to herself a day. But we can't talk about, well, obviously we know what our wives are going through. I'm sure this is true. My wife is, I think, one of the busiest people I know. But just, again, there just seems to be, I think, throughout the whole list, there is a sense of you're meant to be the most important person. You deserve a good, happy life. You deserve fulfillment. You deserve what you want. You deserve to go out. You deserve, what I mean? It's all me focused. And I guess as Christians, we would want to come at this in a different angle, wouldn't we? And thinking of the kind of Philippians 2, that we would consider other people's interests as much as ours, that we would love others. We would put other people's needs before ourselves. And if we're thinking of doing that for our physical next door neighbors, or if we're thinking about doing that for members of our church, how much more should we be doing that for our kids, that actually we only get to look after them for a certain amount of years? Your girls are older than mine, and already you probably feel like, although you have the privilege of them still being at home, which I think is on our list, that your influence on them is going to be less than mine is right now with my youngest. My two older girls put themselves to bed, so that's already, and I can see with my youngest, I really cherish that at the moment. We get to put her to bed, get to pray with her every night, read a Bible story. I wish I did that every night, but it doesn't always happen that way. But I realize that that's every evening. Sometimes I'm like, oh, can I be bothered? But I know I'll look back on that in the future and go, I wish I could have that time again, where you have the privilege of speaking into humans' lives. You are responsible for them. So it's not about me time right now. And again, if it's specifically mums here, dads, sort it out. Give your wife some time. You know what I mean? Take the kids out. And there are practical ways that you can help. But I just think me time is not a biblical concept, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a wee note at the side of that one because I can't really understand that. It was said to us, and I have now said it to other people, that these precious times that you have as a parent with your children when they are under your care and dependent on you, they do pass. I would say my first response to that, kids kill your me time. Yes, they do, but it's not going to be forever. And one day you'll be wishing, but what I've never been able to understand it. The best times of the day for me was going to pick the girls up from school. I loved it. School holidays. I used to dread the end of the summer holidays. I know people make jokes about it, and they put it's the most wonderful time of the year in August. On the TV advertisements for school uniforms.
Yeah.
Go back. But I loved having the girls at home, and being at home with them, and doing things with them, and that's why I would never have been good at homeschooling, because I would just not have been disciplined. I would say, well, let's go out and do something, as opposed to. So I've never looked upon it in that way. It's never been a sacrifice. Yes, we do need to take time out for ourselves. We understand that, and to me, that's just wisdom, and mum and dad should recognize that, not only in each other but about the other, and create time for that. But to me, there's going to be plenty of time, Lord willing, for me time. And I would also reference that classic song, "Cats in the Cradle." You know that one?
I know of it, yeah.
So, maybe you'll can post a link at the bottom, but there's people who are listening and watching and who have said that title too, and they will get it straight away. And oftentimes Helen said to me, "Stuart, Cats in the Cradle." And so you need to go and suss out what these lyrics are, but they're very, very true.
I'd like to look more into the study for this one, because I find that hard to believe. 17 minutes for the average parent, particularly mums, when we average 5 or 6 hours of watching, TV, YouTube, Netflix a day. So maybe they're not classing that as downtime. So, I think basically slightly going back on what I'd said, I don't think me time is a biblical concept. If that is just a kind of a selfish, just time that you deserve, I do think we're called to prioritize our relationship with the Lord. And as you were kind of alluding to, definitely need to make space for that. And again, I think there are ways and practical ways to help each other in that, having your daily devotional, making sure that putting God first is going to make you the best parent, is going to make you the best husband. But I will just say on this, the moment I realized that my girlfriend, I wanted her to be my wife, was I am quite an introvert. And so I do, when I'm out kind of socializing with lots of people, I do feel like I need, like I can't just go straight to bed. If I come back off some, say been out till 12 o'clock, hanging out with some people, I come back, I'll always just tend to have a bit of time because I just need that time away from people. But I remember when I realized that kind of downtime actually was with my girlfriend. And so the me time then, in a sense, if you want to call it that, ultimately involved her. And so what I'm saying is, I don't see time with my wife and now time with my children as somehow only draining or only difficult. Actually, you know what I mean? That's where I get my life and joy. And I think we're saying the same things, but
it's interesting. I said to Helen just the other week, my ministry is itinerant at the moment, and thank God we're in a period of time where it's been pretty busy. And I said to Helen just the other week, I said, I love this time on a Sunday morning where we're driving to, mostly out of Sheffield, to where I'm going to be preaching. And I said, I love this time when we're driving. It's just the two of us. And so that's really, an example of what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Kids' education costs a fortune. If you want your kids to succeed in life, you'll likely want them to go to a good school and off to college. Be prepared to spend a lot of money to make that happen. I feel like maybe you're in a better place to talk about this, because I don't really pay for the education that my children are in at the moment. I don't know if you have done. Is that something to consider? Is that a good reason not to have kids?
Well, not necessarily. No. I mean, it's like I say to people who are thinking about marriage, people say, well, wait until we can afford it. You'll never be able to afford it. You wait till you afford something, you'll never do anything. Our children went to public schools, so there's never any private education, and both of them have been to university, and have student loans, but they're not. They're not. There's another discussion. They're not earning enough to be at a place where they have to pay back the student loans. But you know, these things, it's life. These things take care of themselves. I don't think that's a reason for whether it's not having children or not going to university.
Another one for you, as this doesn't apply to me yet. Kids don't move out these days, so your girl's still living at home.
Yes, well, you know, to make it wider, you know, there's a lot of children who are moving back home because of the high rental prices on properties, and because they can never afford enough to even get on the property ladder in terms of owning their own homes, and they're having to move back home. I don't see that. I like having the girls at home, you know, but you know, it's a natural progression that, you know, children will want in an ideally to be out and away from home, you know, and so they don't move out. I would say that it would be wrong. But if they can't move out
right, okay,
because of circumstances, that is different.
Yeah, I think this is a ridiculous reason not to have kids. And I think if there's anything to discuss about that, there are wider issues in society in terms of how expensive it is to rent, how expensive it is to get on the housing market ladder, which I'm not even on now. And so I think in situations where I've heard of, like you said, kind of kids moving back in with their parents and then being able to save some money through working and staying at home, and then can put a deposit on a house a couple of years later. I think what a great gift. And again, that's what parents are going to do, because parents love their kids. They want to give them the best opportunity, and they don't want them living in some substandard housing or you know, to be paying for rent and then have no money left at all. You know, the bank of mum and dad is a real thing, and praise God for it. If you've got parents who love their kids, who want to help them.
You know both my daughters, and you know Leah. Heather's been on First Friday and Too Hot
last
for
month,
Radio. You haven't had the experience of having Leah on yet, but you've met Leah, so you know what she's like, and she reminds Helen and I that she will be choosing our nursing home. So that's why she's still at home.
Excellent. Love it. Another one for you. These are all, it must be over the list they're getting for older kids, because kids wreck your car. Once your kids are old enough to drive, be prepared for them to borrow your car and bring it back in less than perfect condition. Is this a reality for you?
Not for me so far, anyway. So
there you go. That was easy.
Yeah.
Kids ruin your clothes. If you enjoy high fashion, which obviously me and you do, and fancy clothes, kids may not be for you. From sticky fingers covered in chocolate and accidental vomiting to snotty noses, kids are filthy and tend to share their filth with those they love the most, their parents.
Yeah, I mean, we talking about Leah. I mean, when she was a baby and a toddler, she just used to pull it out with her food, and so. But you learn, don't you? You know, and so
you must have done this before as a preacher when you go out of the house and you're just like, check here, check here, check here.
My nice, you know, my white shirt on, or my tie or whatever, and she would, you know, dump food all over me. That's just part of it, you know. And so you learn by experience.
Indeed.
Put on an overall.
Bibs are for not just for kids.
Yeah.
So that's the 20, and we've had a little bit of fun. But the part of when we first discussed this article, the reason that we thought we wanted to talk about it was ultimately there's been a huge decision in America in recent months, Roe v. Wade, and certain states now, I think, banning abortion. And I guess, although we've had a little bit of fun with that, there is a serious element that actually many parents in this country, obviously around the world, choose to end pregnancies. And whether it's because of those reasons that we've said, or often I think people say it's not the right time of life, or whatever it may be, we are at a point where there's been a real shift in America, and I thought it'd be interesting for us to discuss that, what you think the ramifications are. Do you think it would ever happen in this country? And so you are someone who travels to America normally at least once a year, and probably in some of those states, I imagine that now are banning it. Maybe, I don't know. So what's your take on it? And as I say, I realize we've gone from the kind of slightly humorous to something very dark, but I think important to talk about.
Yeah, well, of course, we understand. Well, let me say this first of all, to make to further reinforce the link to the 20 points that we've been talking about, and this Roe v. Wade and abortion. The common denominator to those 20 good reasons or whatever really is that word selfishness. And I think that is the common denominator to this whole issue and debate of abortion. If I can just direct your attention to a couple of verses, in Matthew, let me get this right, Matthew 24 and 12, Jesus talks about the increase of wickedness and the love of most growing cold. And then in 2 Timothy chapter 3, the first few verses, where it talks about the terrible times in the last days, and we're in the last days. We understand that the last days is the period of time between Christ's first coming and his second coming. We're in the last days. But there are some standout phrases in the description of the last days where it talks about people being lovers of self, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure. And that to me is the core issue of everything that we've talked about today that prompted our discussion, whether it's these 20 reasons or the Roe v. Wade decision. At the root of it is self and selfishness, what Oswald Chambers described as my claim to my right to myself. And that is our problem. The decision, the Roe v. Wade's decision, is not banning abortions. What it is doing is that it's handing back the power in terms of the right, the automatic right to abortion, to be legislated by each state in the United States. So it's not a ban, but there was already near half the states in the United States ready for this decision because that is what they wanted. And so it is just a lie to suggest that this is some minority issue that only a few really fundamental conservative Christians, whether it be in the United States or here, are concerned about. There's a lot of people who want to protect the right to life inside the womb as well as outside of the womb. And the feeling in the United States, since you asked about that, from where I'm in Tennessee mostly, and it is very deep. But at least the United States, when it comes to these issues, that there is a clear choice that you get to make when you're voting.
Yeah, we just don't have that here, do we?
Whereas we don't. The major parties, I think I said before, with the exception of the DUP in Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland really is its own special case politically within the United Kingdom. But the main parties, certainly in the mainland here in the United Kingdom, the things that they agree on are the things that would be anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-Bible, and anti-family, sadly. And so I just think that this is another example of my right to myself, whether it's self-expression. There's no such thing as an accident in terms of a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if people have sex, ultimately the child's going to be the result, you know. And so the answer is very simple, and the answer is biblical. That that sex should be between a man and a woman uh, within marriage. Um, and so I just think I'm amazed that we live in a day where killing children, and of course this debate. We said this about the LGBTQ issue before, that we were so naive in the church when they said, well, if you would just agree to let's redefine marriage, and we said, okay, we believe the lie, and then it's something more and something more down the road to way beyond transgender that they're now trying to legislate for paedophilia to be a normative sexual expression and pattern of behavior. Um, we're now talking in regard to abortion about potentially abortions being allowed a certain number of days after birth. And I don't think we'd be called abortion then, but the parents can decide actually after a baby has been born whether they want to keep it, not in the sense of putting the child up for adoption, but whether they want to keep it alive. And so again, we're so naive. It goes, the boundaries keep, it's a slippery slope, boundaries keep getting pushed. Back in the Old Testament times, there was a pagan form of worship, a pagan deity called Moloch, where part of that was sacrificing infants. And God is recorded in the Old Testament as speaking against that practice. And he does it, he's recorded more than once, but he says the same thing every time regarding to the sacrificing of children to Moloch. And God says, which I had not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind that they should do this abomination. And it's a sin. And we now are living in a society where it is politically correct, politically expedient, certainly in our country, because it's what all the political parties agree on, that we are celebrating and promoting and parading the killing of infants.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was thinking of that same verse in the Old Testament, and that we today think ourselves so much better than that. The cultures that would sacrifice babies, we are kind of appalled by that, but then don't seem to be able to see the irony today that simply because it's in the mother's womb, you know what I mean? We have the right to end those lives. I remember watching a YouTube video of a guy who was talking about slavery. He was basically commenting that he'd noticed that some of his heroes of old had owned slaves, and he was like, how could they be so blind to not see how wrong it is to own slaves? And at the end, he says this great moment where he's like, but I wonder if we'll ever look back in generations to come and be surprised at what we are doing now. Generations in the future will think, how could they do that? And he said, I've been thinking about it, and actually I think I've come up with something. I think in the future people will look back and think, how could those people in those days kill, and I was like, animals and eat them? And it came out as basically, he said he thinks in the future everyone will be vegan or vegetarian. And we've seen a huge rise in veganism, in people becoming vegetarians. All of our favorite fast food joints now, even KFC has got its vegan burger. But that just seemed, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad that he's decided he thinks people will look back and think it's wrong that we would kill animals and eat them, but actually has missed the fact that we are killing millions and millions of children. My understanding, when I looked at the figures in 2019, there were 42 million abortions in the world that year, and it is officially the leading cause of death in the world, making up 40% of all deaths. And I think that everybody in our society, pretty much everybody, recognizes that life is precious. We do everything we can to preserve life, from wearing a seatbelt to not eating that second cheeseburger. Do you know what I mean? To all the medication that we have. There are whole campaigns to make sure that nobody starts smoking anymore, because we see the legacy of smoking is death. So we need to get rid of that. We have safety on the roads. Everything we do is about preserving life. Think about how much we do every day to try and preserve our life, except when it's in the womb, except when it is. And I think this whole debate has been very cleverly moved from the kind of the rights of the baby, or whether when does a fetus become a baby, all that stuff really is a side point to a woman's choice and women's rights. When I hear people talk about it, it is this idea that it's kind of some patriarchal society trying to take away women's rights. Haven't we got to a day where women can vote and women can earn as much as men in the workplace and all that kind of stuff? And I think we've managed to move away from life and basically the ending of a life to a point about women's rights and women's choice. I know I've mentioned to you before that it really shocked me. Golden Globes evening, where they give away all the kind of what's the word? All the mine's gone completely blank. Awards for yes. That's the word. For best actor and best film and all that, and it was Michelle Williams who got up and said, the only way I was able to win this award was because of my right to my own body to choose. And I thought, and I remember the cameras kind of spanning across people, and people had tears in their eyes and standing ovation and applauding. And I thought, I do hope that generations in the future look back and are appalled to say, so they just killed millions and millions of children. I really hope that
I don't know they will, Tom.
But what's happened in America? It's like, are you not like we've looked at? I think we're on the same page. We believe it's wrong, but straight away when we talked about this decision, we've gone straight to how bad it is and why people how unacceptable it is. But actually, surely this is a positive sign, isn't it? Like, think of all the preachers that we like who talk about America's doomed, America's being judged by God. Is this a sign of the reversal of that? Surely this is a positive step for America?
But yet, democracy, whether we talk about our own recent democracy, whether it be Brexit, whether it be should Scotland be independent, and I'm offering no opinion in that, I'm using these as examples. What I would say is that democracy is not having another vote and another vote and another vote till you get the decision that you want. Democracy is having a vote and you abide by the decision. Okay? I'm saying that to say this, that President Biden has come out and said that he is looking to overturn the overturned decision by executive order. That's not democracy. And there's a reason why the Supreme Court is called the Supreme Court, because it is supposed to be divorced from these other pressures. But if by executive order, the president can just turn around and put a score through the decision that he has made, that's undemocratic. That's the least of it. It's undemocratic. It's just immoral. People are it's like I said earlier, this is not, the people who want to be pro-life are not in the minority. Just because you shout the loudest, or that example you used at the Golden Globes, because you've got a bigger platform, doesn't mean that you're holding the majority view. But even that's irrelevant. Somebody has rightly said, one with God is a majority. It's what God says. Mm-hmm. And when we've had conversations over the last couple of years on our podcasts, society has, about the way that history is being rewritten. Why has nobody taken Darwin to task? His original Origin of Species.
Pretty racist, wasn't it?
It was. And the common denominator of evolution, of slavery, of the Holocaust, and of abortion is to dehumanize the victim. Mm. That's how Christian people were able to rationalize slavery, because they had been taught that, well, they're not, they're subhuman. That is how to a large extent, the Holocaust was able to be passed off on the German people because the Jews were not really people. And so we are, and then with abortion, we're saying that, well, it's not really a life. And I noticed that you've got your Bible open at Psalm 139, and
You're getting in there first.
but I'm not. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Okay.
To Luke chapter 1, verses 41 and 44. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Verse 44. As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. How's about that as a testimony to viable life within the womb? I am going to throw you a major curveball.
Here we go.
Because I don't necessarily know the answer to this. It was a
well, I definitely won't.
Then, it was a curveball that was thrown to me actually when I mentioned to a good friend of mine what we'd be talking about today, and he and his wife spent some years in the Philippines. And so he said, I want you to think about this. Now, he was not arguing for abortion. He was making the point that we get it away from abortions of convenience.
Okay.
He was making the point that it is not as simple in practice. So I've termed what he said the Philippine dilemma. That's not his title, it's mine. And he gave it as an example. And I checked some of this online because he's been home in the United Kingdom maybe for coming on 10 years, so I wanted just to see how up to date it was. But still to this day, the Philippines has one of the most restrictive abortion policies in the world. It is a criminal offence with no exceptions from what I understand. And so there's not only the criminal aspect to it, but there's a great stigma attached to it. And there's a high rate of unsafe abortions in the Philippines. And that is an argument, by the way, that we do need to take into consideration that if abortion was fully legalized, like full term and even beyond, like the debate about legalizing drugs, do you actually solve the problem with that action alone? No, you don't. In large part, you drive it underground. So you've got the unsafe abortions in this regard. You've also got the Roman Catholic Church in the Philippines that is very influential, that is against abortion and birth control.
Yeah. And
the Philippines is also a male-dominated society. And so you have got incidences of incest, of rape. You've got the general poverty that there is in the Philippines. You've got this Roman Catholic influence, no contraception, but you've still got males who want to have their sex.
Yeah.
Going back to what we talked earlier on. In the Philippines, there are 90,000 hospitalizations every year as a result of unsafe abortions. And there's a high fatality rate about 100 per year, and that's more than other diseases like tuberculosis and things like that. And so the issue here, and this is the curveball I'm throwing you, is we're not talking about abortions of convenience, but what may be termed abortions of necessity. So my question is, because it's a question I'm asking myself, I didn't know all that. I'd never thought about that before. We think of our own country, which has got a good infrastructure and all the rest of it in place. Is there is there a place for an abortion of necessity?
It's a very good question, very difficult to answer, and probably one I need to think about, because I guess it makes it real when you think about specific situations like that, because normally when we would talk about, because I read an article earlier today on The Guardian, it was basically saying how already in America there was a girl who's 10 years old who's been raped, and now struggle very much to get an abortion. And you just think it brings it front and center and makes it very difficult, particularly when a woman has been victimized already. And I think that's what is so evil about that, is that to then end a pregnancy always has a lasting impact. I know someone who had an abortion, and it was more of convenience, but she hadn't realized the impact on herself and actually got a tattoo of the date of the abortion on her arm, and it's messed her up. And so when you've got people who are already in very messed up situations, already it's such a hard place in life, I don't think kind of a quick fix is ultimately a quick fix. I don't think it is. I think the lasting impact is often untold. And one thing my wife has said, my wife's a midwife and has worked previously in gynecology, and she said that it's often not at the time of an abortion for most women, the fear of the pregnancy and all that is the main thing in their head. They're not thinking about the future, so they get it done. And although it's horrible, no one enjoys, you know what I mean? It's a horrible thing. It's painful anyway. But so it's often later on when they'll then get pregnant again. And so it's a pregnancy they want to pursue. They feel like in a much better place. And then their mind goes back to previously. And so I think of these women who already victimized. I'm not pretending like there's an easy answer, but I actually don't think abortion would be the easy way out. It might seem like it at the point, but actually later on, what if they want to have children when they're older and then they remember, actually, I've been in a situation where I've ended a pregnancy. I would just say, yeah, when you were talking about it, I thought I've still got the get out, which is the contraception, which is, I agree with what you said earlier. At least in this country, there is no reason for someone to get pregnant who doesn't want to get pregnant. In fact, I know many people that long to get pregnant and not able to. And so just use contraception. It's everywhere and you can get it for free if you need. I don't understand why you'd think it's the cost is so much more. You know what I mean? Even just the inconvenience to yourself. Do you know what I mean? To then have to go away and deal with this. So, but yeah, as soon as you took that off the cards, I do think for me personally, I think the Catholic Church has got a lot to answer for because of its view. Because ultimately, whatever your rules are, and this is where I would maybe, this is where I start to question some of my kind of stance on stuff, is the difference between what I expect, how I expect Christians to live and how I expect society. And so can we expect society to act in a moral way when they don't have the Spirit of God living within them? And so when we make rules like you're not to do this or not to do that, it doesn't actually change the heart, does it? It might change the situation. And so in America, it's just made it really inconvenient. Will it impact the amount of abortions? Probably. But ultimately, lots of people are just going to travel further. They're going to get in their cars, and those who can afford it are going to go to abortion clinics in other states, and others who don't have the money are going to go to backstreet. And I don't doubt we're going to have an increase in dangerous abortions and women getting infections and all that kind of stuff. So there is an argument to say that does a ban on something like this actually change anything? But then on the other side, I think even if I guess it's hard to tell in myself because I am a Christian, but I think even if I wasn't a Christian, I think I'd still be against abortion. I don't know if you feel that same way. Maybe I wouldn't, but I just feel like to ending a life, it can't be the best option. But I know that you could put a situation in front of me that I would in myself look at and just go, I can't see, like, that is just horrible situation. Everything's wrong within it. So it's I don't pretend to have ironed all that out. But what I would say is I think my main point is it's not the quick fix that people often think, because my wife has dealt with people that have then many, many years later still dealing with the trauma.
And I think in this country, with what happened during COVID and what they call the do-it-yourself abortions, they have been now normalized.
So you get it through the post, can't you?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that is just, from what I understand from the Christian Institute, it's just you can get these by just following just a phone or video consultation with a doctor, and that is just not enough. Like you said, there's a lot more that needs to be explored. Um, Let me just say, I think I've got two things to say because I don't know how long we've been going now, and
I
I want
think it's
to get
quite a
this.
while, isn't it?
Yes,
So yeah, we
and
should
so I
probably
want,
bring it to a
but
close.
interestingly enough, um, and I just throw this out there for people to think about, and I think it's good that you and I threw the question at you, and you've not tried to answer it, and I'm not going to try and answer about is there such a thing as an abortion of necessity, because the whole point of this podcast is not to provide answers, but to help people to think. And so we want the people watching and listening us to think this through. And if they want to contact us about what they think, we'd really appreciate
Absolutely.
that. The Greek word for sorcery or witchcraft in the Bible
Not baloney.
is not baloney. It's pharmakio. And it's related to the use of drugs, but it means sorcery and witchcraft. Another word which has the same root meaning is abortifacient.
Mm.
And I make that point to say that at its roots, abortion is related to the occult and to witchcraft, not just grammatically, but historically. And I would say that in its core, it is because it's killing children. We talked about the 20 reasons, and then we've gone into Roe v. Wade and abortion, and again this underlying issue of selfishness, which permeates, sadly, not just the culture, but the church, where we've given way from committed people to consumers in church. I always remember Rob Parsons saying that we do not have a right to a church that suits us in every way. Getting back to Oswald Chambers' phrase, my claim to my right to myself. Jesus, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 6, doesn't it? In the light of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, you're not your own. You were bought at a price.
Yeah.
Ali Beth Stuckey has written an excellent book. It's got a great title, You're Not Enough, and That's Okay. Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love. Here's what she writes, and this will be my parting contribution, if that's all right. Listen to what she says. Placing ourselves at the center of the universe always leads us to confusion and chaos. It convinces us of our enoughness and leaves us disappointed when our sufficiency inevitably proves a mirage. It makes us feel we have the authority to determine our own truths, only for us to realize we're unable to distinguish right from wrong on our own. It encourages us to chase after perfection, both within and outside of us, leaving us exhausted when we see that perfection was just a mirage. It tells us that our dreams are ours to have, that we deserve everything we want, leaving us bitter when we don't get our way. It assures us that we can only love other people when we love ourselves, ensuring we end up alone.
Excellent quote. You've mentioned that book before, I think, as well.
Yes,
I
maybe
definitely
that
need to.
quote, but it's certainly pertinent today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have got my Bible open at Psalm 139. It seems like the right thing to do to read these verses. And I guess going back to what I was saying before about a heart change, I think for Christians, just to recognize the significance of how we've been made. And aren't you glad? And aren't I glad that my parents didn't decide to get rid of me? I'm very grateful for my life and recognize, as you said, that every life has ultimately been created by the Lord. And so even those who don't recognize this, even those who don't turn to God and say, I'm grateful for this, are still created by him. And that actually have been knit together in their mother's womb. And I would just say very, very briefly that I just love the fact that adoption is so at the heart of the gospel, that we've been adopted into God's family. And I love it when that is shown in families. And so in my family, both of my brothers have adopted children, and the minister of my church has adopted a child as well. And I just think it's a beautiful sign of the gospel that there are options, that if there is someone even who's watching and just going, I just don't know what I can't raise this child, it's not the right time of life. Well, imagine you took a situation that is difficult and hard, and you think there's only one way out. Ultimately, seeing that baby through to birth and blessing. Do you know how many people in this country struggle to get pregnant? You know how many Christians that would be willing to say, I'll take a child, and actually what could come out of it is a beautiful gospel kind of gospel-laced opportunity for you to bless a family who would love to raise a child, and instead of taking, as we said, the easier way out, that I actually don't think is the easy way. So let's just finish then with these few verses that are, I'm sure, very familiar to you from Psalm 139, but just so good as we end, just to remember God's creation of each one of us. It says this in Psalm 139, verse 13 and onwards. For you, and it's talking of the Lord, created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Amen to that. Thank you so much for being with us. And as Stuart already said, we'd love to hear from you if you've got any comments. We don't pretend to have all the answers, but we just like to talk and hopefully help you think about these issues biblically. Do send any questions you have to info@gnba.net, and we will be back in September, Lord willing.